Hey everyone! I've recently seen geometric candles floating around the internet, and I thought that they were really cool, and I wanted to make them my own. But with Thanksgiving right around the corner, I was inspired to make some candles with a Thanksgiving twist. I came up with a 3D turkey design to make and to share with all of you. First, I made a 3D model of a turkey in this cool, free 3D program called Blender, and then I used another free program called Pepakura to unfold it so that you could print it out and create a papercraft model, which will act as our mold. You'll need the printed pattern, an X-Acto knife, scissors, acrylic paint, a wick. I used a raw wick that I had to prep before use. Basically, you just soak it in melted wax for a few minutes. You don't need to use a raw wick, that's just what I had, so I used it. You can definitely just use a pre-prepared wick. Wax, crayons, and glue. Download the pattern and print it out on cardstock or just regular printer paper. I recommend cardstock because it's stronger, so it will have a more crisp look, but I also tested this out with normal printer paper, and it turned out alright. Some of the faces of the shape bowed out a little bit when it was filled with wax, but generally it should keep its shape. So if all you have is printer paper, then it should be fine. Use your X-Acto knife or your scissors to cut out the pattern. Cut on all the solid lines. After it's all cut out, you need to crease the folds so they'll bend nicely. This is a must if you're using cardstock, but if you're just using printer paper, you can get away with skipping this step, but I would still recommend to do it. Take your X-Acto knife, flip it over, and at this angle, use it to trace the dotted lines of the pattern. Since you're using the wrong side of the knife, and it's at this angle, it shouldn't be cutting the pattern at all, just creasing the fold. After you trace all the dotted lines, fold them accordingly. The pattern has two types of dotted lines. This type means a mountain fold, like this, while this type means a valley fold, like this. Now that you've folded everything correctly, it's time to glue together. I used Mod Podge. Apply the glue to the tabs. It's easiest to use a small brush for this. Glue it to the corresponding number. You want to glue the tabs onto the outside of the shape. Since we're going to be pouring wax into the inside of it, if you glue the tabs on the inside, you'd be able to see an indentation of it in the finished candle. Don't forget to put together this guy. After it's all glued together, dab some glue onto the points of the turkey to help close up any holes. This next step is to make absolutely sure this thing will not leak. I've seen tutorials where they say to use latex house paint, but I thought that wasn't completely necessary and that acrylic paint should work just as well, and lo and behold, for me it did. So take your paint and spread a thick layer all over. Let dry and repeat 2 or 3 times. I did 2 layers and I had no leaks. You only need to paint the turkey. Don't worry about that other tube thing. I mean, you can paint it if you want, but you don't need to. After you've painted all the layers, we're finally going to attach the rectangle tube thing. As you can see here, the little triangle tabs should match perfectly to the front of the turkey like this. Glue or tape them in place. We're going to fill this thing upside down so the tube is there to help support that side of the turkey to make it level. After this, I took the Mod Podge and put a little bit more on a few of the edges that I felt were in need, It was probably unnecessary, but I was just being extra careful. So if you feel like you need any reinforcement, then now is the time to take care of that. So since we are going to be making this thing upside down, we'll need to make a hole for the wick. Mark the middle of the turkey's back and poke a hole. I used a push pin from my corkboard. You can use a needle or an awl or anything like that. But if it's thin, you'll probably need to wiggle it around a bit to widen the hole to be big enough to accommodate the wick. Stick the wick through the hole and pull through until there's about an inch or two sticking out of the hole. You want to use a piece of wick that is long enough to leave a little extra sticking out of the large hole too. In order for it to not leak at this point, put a little elmer's glue around the base of the wick. You want to use elmer's because it's water soluble, so if there's still a little glue stuck to the wick after you get the mold completely off the candle, you can just clean it off by running it under water. Let the glue dry. Finally, it's time to make the candle. Using a double boiler, melt the wax. I used an old coffee can that was placed in a pot that had about an inch or so of simmering water. To color the wax, I used crayons. I attempted to do an ombre, but it didn't really work out that well, as you'll soon see. I wanted to do 3 distinct layers, so I separated the crayons into groups of 3. I melted a large amount of plain wax that was hopefully going to be enough to fill up the mold in one go, and then I added the first group of crayons to that. I poured the first layer, let that harden, threw in the second group of crayons in the melted wax, poured the second layer, let that harden, threw in the last group of crayons, poured the last layer, and at that point I realized I didn't melt enough wax for the whole thing in the first place, so I had to melt more plain wax for the bottom. So in theory, the ombre should have worked because the wax mixture should have been getting more and more concentrated with pigment from the crayons, but I guess I put a little too much of the crayon into the wax for the first layer, so there wasn't really any distinction between the first and second layer. Another no-no I did was that in between layers, in an attempt to speed things up, I threw the mold into the freezer. The finished candle had cracks in it, and I believe that's because I tried to cool the wax too quickly. I did 2 other candle prototypes before this, and they had just cooled overnight on the counter, and they were just fine, no cracks or anything. So anyway, after you pour all the wax into the mold, let it harden completely. When you come back to it, you'll probably see a little bit of like a divot on the bottom. You'll want to just melt a little bit more wax and pour it into the divot to make it a bit more level on the bottom. Once it's completely hardened, snip off the excess wick at the bottom of the candle. Now it's time to rip the mold off. With paper, this is going to be a lot easier, but with cardstock, you'll probably need a little bit of help from an X-Acto knife. Just be careful and try not to nick the candle too much. But once you get it going, it should be pretty easy. So here you can see my complete ombre fail and the cracks all in the tail of this poor bird. It's a shame. When you get to the wick, just pull carefully straight up. If you're lucky, you'll also remove all of the elmer's glue as well. Like I mentioned earlier, if there's still a little bit stuck to the wick, you can just clean that off under some running water. And I almost forgot, if your wick is a little bit long, you'll want to cut it back until it's about a ½ inch to an inch away from the candle. So here's a finished candle along with my first 2 prototypes. As you can see, these guys don't have cracks in them or anything. The smaller turkey has a line halfway through it because I initially didn't melt enough wax for it. I had to do it in 2 goes. So I would err on the side of melting a little too much wax rather than a little less than you need so you don't get any little boo-boos like that. The little one was also made with a paper mold. So you can see that it'll still have the shape of a turkey, it just isn't as defined as the cardstock molds. Aside from the failed ombre and the cracks in the last one, I do like how these turned out. I'll definitely be throwing these guys on our Thanksgiving table this year. I hope you all enjoy. Obviously, I still need some help in the ombre candle department, but if you guys attempt to make your own, I would love to see the results. Even if you guys just do solid colored turkey candles, I'd still love to see them. You can send pictures to any of my social media, Twitter, Tumblr, or Instagram. You can also follow me on those as well. If you like this video and want to see more, please subscribe. If you have any questions or if you have any suggestions for future videos, please leave a comment down below. And I'll see you next week.